In the early 20th century, San Francisco was a city in the throes of rapid expansion, a bustling hub of innovation and ambition on the western edge of the United States. Located on a narrow peninsula bordered by the Pacific Ocean and San Francisco Bay, the city's scenic views and booming economy made it one of the most desirable places to live and work. Its population was growing rapidly, and so were the skyscrapers, streetcar lines, and intricate neighborhoods that sprawled through the city's famously hilly landscape. San Francisco was coming into its own as a modern metropolis, establishing itself as a key gateway for trade and immigration. But as the city evolved, so did its risks. San Francisco was not only a marvel of urban growth, but also uniquely vulnerable to natural disasters due to its location along the San Andreas Fault. This geological fault line, which runs almost the entire length of California, marks a boundary where the Pacific and North American tectonic plates meet. In many ways, the city's very existence on this fault line was a ticking clock for disaster, one that only a few experts truly understood or worried about at the time. Despite these hidden risks, the city's expansion was largely unregulated. Construction was happening at breakneck speed, but building standards and safety regulations were lacking. With little oversight, contractors often cut corners, opting for cheaper, less durable materials. The city's infrastructure was also relatively fragile. San Francisco's water supply system, for instance, was outdated and poorly equipped for a growing city, let alone a major disaster. In fact, San Francisco had already experienced smaller earthquakes in the past, but these minor tremors were largely ignored or forgotten in the enthusiasm of the city's golden era. Throughout the years leading up to the quake, there were occasional reminders of the city's vulnerability. Some geologists and city planners had raised concerns about the need for better earthquake preparedness. Still, few believed that such a disaster could hit in their lifetimes, and even fewer had ever considered the potential scale of devastation that could unfold. As San Francisco continued to grow, the booming neighborhoods and thriving downtown districts became ever more crowded. The lack of formal building codes meant that many structures were vulnerable to even moderate earthquakes, let alone the powerful shockwave waiting beneath the Earth's surface. In residential areas, buildings were tightly packed, and construction materials varied in quality, creating the perfect conditions for fire to spread should an accident occur. What no one realized, though, was that the city was on the brink of one of the most devastating urban disasters in American history. In the pre-dawn hours of April 18, 1906, San Francisco lay quiet under a still dark sky. At precisely 5:12 in the morning, this calm was shattered as a powerful earthquake struck the city, radiating shockwaves across the region with a force that no one had anticipated. This wasn't a minor tremor, but a colossal quake that would measure an estimated magnitude of 7.9, shaking the ground so violently that entire buildings shifted and cracked within seconds. People were jolted awake by the tremors, some thrown from their beds, while others scrambled to escape from their crumbling homes. The quake's epicenter lay offshore, just 2 miles west of San Francisco, along the infamous San Andreas Fault. The seismic waves radiated quickly, creating destruction not only within San Francisco, but throughout the surrounding areas, including coastal towns and nearby cities like Santa Rosa and San Jose. The quake's intensity was so strong that it was felt as far north as Oregon and as far south as Los Angeles. The first moments were sheer chaos as buildings, especially those constructed without solid foundations or quality materials, began to collapse around the city. Entire neighborhoods crumbled, and within seconds, thousands of people were trapped or injured as walls buckled and roofs fell. The shaking lasted less than a minute, but the destruction it left was astonishing. The city's famous brick buildings and ornate Victorian homes, many of which were built without structural reinforcement, proved particularly vulnerable, collapsing in heaps or leaning at precarious angles. For many who survived the initial quake, the nightmare was only beginning. Gas lines ruptured throughout the city, igniting fires that would soon turn out to be as catastrophic as the earthquake itself. While the earth had quieted, the sounds of destruction persisted, with the snapping of power lines, the crashing of broken glass, and the cries of frightened residents filling the air. The city's infrastructure had also taken a heavy blow. Major streets were buckled and torn open, with deep cracks that made movement nearly impossible in some areas. The cable car tracks that connected neighborhoods across the city were ripped from the ground, and the central water mains were badly damaged. This loss of water pressure would soon prove disastrous, as firefighters scrambled to combat the flames now erupting across the city. San Francisco's citizens were in a state of shock, and their first instinct was to flee to any open space they could find. Many people rushed to parks like Golden Gate Park and the Presidio, seeking refuge from the collapsing buildings and the fires spreading through the city. At the same time, the emergency response teams and firefighters faced an unprecedented challenge with limited resources, broken communication lines, and no access to water in several districts. The scale of the quake's destruction was unlike anything San Francisco had ever faced, and it would take days to grasp the full extent of the damage. But as the fires continued to grow, the city's residents and officials realized that the earthquake itself had only been the beginning of a much larger catastrophe, and in the days following the earthquake, San Francisco became a city transformed. Fires raged across the city for nearly 3 days, consuming entire neighborhoods and leaving blocks upon blocks of once bustling streets in smoldering ruin. By the time the flames finally died down, an estimated 500 city blocks had been reduced to ash. Over 28,000 buildings were completely destroyed, including landmark structures, homes, and businesses that define the city's identity. The famous City Hall, an architectural marvel completed just a few years before, was left as a mere shell, reduced to rubble by the quake and fire alike. For the tens of thousands left homeless, the situation was dire. Nearly half of San Francisco's population of about 400,000 people were displaced. Makeshift camps sprang up in public parks like Golden Gate Park, the Presidio, and even along the beaches. The U.S. Army, stationed at the Presidio, took immediate action, setting up tents, distributing food, and providing medical care to those in need. Across the city, citizens formed small relief groups, banding together to share what little resources they had and helping each other rebuild what was left. The destruction of infrastructure was catastrophic. Roads, railways, and telegraph lines that connected San Francisco to the outside world were severed, making communication and supply delivery difficult. Relief efforts faced major delays as supplies struggled to make their way through damaged routes. Yet within days, aid from nearby cities, and eventually from across the country, poured in to help the city recover. The spirit of resilience among San Francisco's residents shone brightly as people gathered to clear debris, rescue survivors, and rebuild their lives. The events of April 19th revealed serious weaknesses in San Francisco's city planning and infrastructure. The fires, which accounted for nearly 80% of the destruction, exposed the inadequacies in the city's water system and the lack of fire-resistant building materials. Officials and city planners took these lessons seriously. In the years that followed, new building codes were enforced, focusing on structural integrity and fire resistance, ensuring that future buildings could better withstand such catastrophes. Additionally, new water systems and hydrants were installed across the city to allow for rapid fire suppression, even in the event of a severe earthquake. The impact of the disaster extended far beyond the physical rebuilding of San Francisco. The event prompted nationwide conversations about earthquake preparedness and safety regulations. Other cities built along fault lines, particularly those on the West Coast, began to rethink their own construction practices and emergency plans, recognizing that a similar disaster could strike them as well. This earthquake led to advancements in seismic research, eventually laying the groundwork for what would become modern earthquake engineering and safety standards. As San Francisco slowly rose from the ashes, it emerged as a symbol of resilience and rebirth. While much of its historic architecture had been lost, the rebuilding efforts transformed it into a stronger, safer city. By 1915, less than a decade later, the city was ready to host the Panama Pacific International Exposition, showcasing its recovery and the new San Francisco to the world. The scars left by the earthquake and fires served as a reminder of the city's vulnerability, but also of its unbreakable spirit. Today, the legacy of the 1906 San Francisco earthquake lives on, both in the city's architecture and in the safety protocols it inspired. It was a defining moment that reshaped San Francisco, preparing it to face future challenges while honoring the resilience of those who endured one of the most devastating natural disasters in American history.